My dear child, every single thing you lost has been pressing down on a spring inside you, and heaven is about to release it all at once. Do not scroll past this. What I am about to declare over your life defies every calculation your mind has been running for years. The money you lost, the love you lost, the years you lost. Your mind added those numbers and arrived at a deficit so permanent that you stopped expecting the balance to ever be corrected. You accepted the loss as the final math of your story. Your math is wrong, and mine is about to replace it. A spring that has been compressed does not simply return to its original height when the pressure is removed. It overshoots. It launches past the point where it started, because every pound of force that held down was simultaneously storing energy inside the coil. The longer the compression, the greater the stored energy. The harder the pressing, the more explosive the release. You have been pressed down for years, my child, and the energy stored in your compression is staggering. I know what you lost, not in vague spiritual terms, in specific named measurable terms that match the exact inventory your heart has been keeping in a ledger it reviews every night when the house goes quiet. The money has a number, the love has a name, the years have a count, and you have been staring at that ledger, believing it represents a permanent subtraction from a life that will never balance again. But I do not operate in subtraction. I operate in compression. And what was compressed is about to be released. Not at the rate it was taken, but at 7 times the force. Stay here. What I reveal next is the specific mechanism of how heaven returns what was lost, and why the return always exceeds the original. Type 7X if you haven't carrying the weight of compound loss. Money, love, and time taken simultaneously. And something inside you just shifted, hearing that none of it was subtracted, but all of it was stored. Before we go any further, I need to tell you something that genuinely surprised me. A neuroscientist discovered a simple 7-second technique that actually rewires how your brain processes thoughts. And when I tried it, the difference was almost unsettling. My focus sharpened, ideas started connecting faster, and that mental fog, gone. This isn't manifestation nonsense. It's backed by real brain science, and thousands of people are already seeing results. But here's the catch. Only 5 spots are left. If something inside you is saying, try it, trust that instinct. Click the link in the description or pinned comment before it's too late. The spring inside you has been coiling tighter with every loss, and the tension it now carries is beyond anything your natural mind can calculate, my beloved child. Every financial setback that pushed you backward compressed the coil 1 turn tighter. Every relationship that collapsed added another revolution of stored force. Every year that passed inside a season you were supposed to have exited long ago wound the spring with a pressure that accumulates exponentially rather than linearly. The losses did not stack. They compounded. And compounded compression produces a release that makes the original losses look small by comparison. Your losses have been building a weapon of restoration, and the weapon is fully loaded. I need you to understand what is happening inside you at this exact moment. The spring has reached maximum compression. Not approaching maximum. Maximum. There is no more room inside the coil for additional pressure. The financial loss cannot press it tighter. The relational loss cannot add another turn. The time lost cannot wind it one more revolution. The spring has reached the physical limit of how much energy can be stored inside a single life. And the only possible outcome when a spring reaches maximum compression is release. The release is not optional. It is mechanical. And it is imminent. This message was not aimed at everyone who has experienced a difficult season. This is for the one person whose losses have been so simultaneous, so sustained, and so compounded across multiple areas of life that the spring inside them has reached a tension level that heaven's monitoring system has flagged as critical. Not critical in the sense of dangerous, but critical in the sense of ready. You are at critical tension, my child. The coil cannot hold anymore, and what I set in motion when a spring reaches this level of stored energy is not a gentle uncoiling. It is a launch, vertical, explosive, disproportionate to every natural expectation your deficit-trained mind has been calculating. What I reveal next is the specific moment the compression began, and why knowing the origin of the pressing tells you the magnitude of the release. Type maximum if you feel the tension of compound loss pressing against something inside you that has reached its absolute limit, and you believe God is about to release a force that matches every pound of pressure that has been holding you down. I have been monitoring the tension in your spring since the first loss pressed it down, my dear one, and I have never once looked away from the gauge, not from a distance, not through periodic check-ins. I have been inside the compression chamber of your life, with my hand on the mechanism, feeling every turn of the coil, measuring every pound of pressure, tracking the exact amount of energy being stored with each loss that added its weight to the force holding you down. I know your spring better than you know your losses. I watched the first compression. You remember it, even if your conscious mind has buried the specifics beneath the pile of losses that followed. There was a moment, a specific identifiable moment, where something was taken from your life and the spring inside you compressed for the first time. The coil tightened, the energy storage began, and a process was initiated that would continue accumulating force across every subsequent loss without you understanding the mechanics of what was happening beneath the surface of your grief. That first compression changed the physics of your entire life, and I was there for it. I watched the financial loss that compressed the coil so violently your body physically responded. The tightening in your stomach, the heat behind your eyes, the specific sinking sensation of watching something you worked for disappear into a gap your effort could not bridge. That was not just loss, my beloved child. That was energy being stored at a rate your natural mind could not detect, because the grief was louder than the physics. I watched the relational compression that followed, the person whose departure added turns to the coil that the financial loss had already begun winding. The compound weight of losing money and love in proximity created a compression event so dense that the spring inside you stored more energy in that single season than most people's springs accumulate in a lifetime. You did not just lose, you loaded. What I reveal next is what the years of compression stored, and why the number 7 is not symbolic but structural. Type loaded if you now realize that every loss you experienced was not subtracting from your life but loading a spring with energy so compressed that the release will exceed anything your deficit-trained mind has ever calculated. I know about the ledger you keep in the quietest room of your mind, my beloved child, the one no one else has access to, the one you update involuntarily, not because you choose to count your losses, but because your mind will not stop counting them. It runs the numbers without your permission. In the shower, in the car, at 2 in the morning when the house goes silent and the only sound left is the calculator in your head, producing the same devastating total it produced yesterday, and the day before that, and every day since the losses began compounding. The total never changes, and the unchanging total is its own form of torture. I know the financial column, the specific number that was lost, not the rounded version you tell people when the subject comes up, but the exact figure that your memory preserved. With a precision that surprises even you. You remember what that money represented. Not just currency, time, effort, sacrifice that was converted into a number that was supposed to secure something, and instead disappeared into a deficit that years of earning have not been able to close. The money was not just money, it was compressed life, and losing it felt like losing years you already lived. I know the relational column, my child, the name that sits beside the financial number, not because the two losses are directly connected, but because they occupy the same season. And the mind that processes loss does not separate categories the way filing systems do. It processes them as a single weight, and the single weight of losing money and love in proximity created a compression so dense that your spring absorbed more force in one season than it was originally designed to hold. You exceeded your design capacity, and the fact that the spring did not snap tells you something about the material I made it from. I saw you running the numbers last night, adding the years to the money, to the love, and arriving at a total that your hope cannot afford to challenge, because challenging a number that large with faith that has been this compressed feels like the most dangerous form of self-deception available. The ledger is real. The numbers are accurate. And what I need to tell you next is why accurate numbers do not determine final outcomes when the God who holds the spring is the one doing the math. The deepest wound is not any single loss. It is the compound awareness that you are behind where you were supposed to be by now, my dear child. You have a version of your life in your mind, a parallel timeline where the money was not lost, and the relationship did not end, and the years were spent building rather than surviving. That version has a house, a number in the bank, a person beside you, a career at a certain level, a piece in your chest that the current version does not carry. And the gap between that version and the version you are actually living has become the most painful distance you measure. You measure it constantly, and the measurement never produces anything except grief. I watched you scroll through someone's life last month, someone whose timeline resembles the parallel version you carry in your mind. They have what you calculated you should have by now. They are standing where you mapped your position. And the comparison did not produce motivation. It produced a specific, sharp, nauseating awareness that the gap between where you are and where you should have been is widening with every month that passes, because their timeline is compounding forward, while yours is still recovering from compressions that set you back years. You are not jealous of their life. You are grieving the version of yours that the losses stole. And the cruelest part, my beloved child, is that you blame yourself. Not loudly, not in dramatic self-accusation. In the quiet, persistent background narration that runs beneath your daily functioning. If I had made different choices, if I had seen it coming, if I had been smarter or faster or more cautious, the spring would never have been compressed this far, and the deficit would not exist, and the parallel version would be the actual version. That narration is wrong, but it sounds so reasonable that you have accepted it as truth. The compression was not caused by your failures. It was caused by forces that were applied to a spring that I was deliberately holding in place, because the energy being stored inside the compression was always intended to produce a release that your parallel timeline could never have generated. What you lost produced what is about to launch, and what launches will make the parallel version look small. Type behind if you have been measuring the gap between where you are and where you should have been. And God just told you that the gap is not a deficit, but the distance a compressed spring needs to overshoot its original position. The compression was never the punishment you interpreted it as. It was the loading mechanism for a return so disproportionate that only maximum pressure could fund it, my beloved child. I need you to hear this with the ears of someone who is about to have their entire loss narrative rewritten. Every financial setback that pressed the spring tighter was not money leaving your story. It was energy entering your coil. Every relational departure that added weight to the compression was not love being subtracted from your life. It was force being added to the mechanism that will launch love back toward you at a velocity the original relationship never carried. Nothing left your story. Everything was converted into stored energy. The mathematics of the kingdom do not operate on the same system your ledger uses. Your ledger operates on subtraction. This was taken, this was removed, this was lost. The total is negative. My system operates on compression. This was pressed down, this was stored, this was accumulated. The total is loaded and awaiting release. Same events, completely different accounting. And the years, the ones your mind counts as the most unrecoverable loss of all. I need to address those specifically. Time that was spent inside compression is not time that was wasted. It is time that was storing energy at a rate that only prolonged pressure can produce. A spring compressed for 1 year stores 1 year of energy. A spring compressed for 5 years stores 5 years of energy, compounded by the increasing density of the coil with each passing season. Your years were not wasted. They were loading years. And the energy they stored makes the release exponentially more powerful than a short compression could ever produce. My dear one, the reason the return is sevenfold and not equal is precisely because the compression lasted as long as it did. A short pressing produces a proportional return. A prolonged pressing produces a disproportionate return because the physics of compressed energy reward duration with multiplication. Your long suffering produced your 7 times return. The very thing that felt like the cruelest aspect of your loss, how long it lasted, is the variable that determines the magnitude of what comes back. The mechanism that holds the spring down just developed its first crack, and the stored energy is beginning to press through, my dear child. Something shifted in your life within the last week that your natural mind filed under coincidence, but your spirit flagged as significant. A financial conversation that tilted unexpectedly in your favor. A relational moment that carried a warmth you have not felt in a long time. A brief flash of the feeling you used to carry before the compression began. A sensation of forward motion so foreign to your current experience that it almost frightened you. That was not coincidence. That was the first fracture in the mechanism. The system that has been holding your spring in compression does not release all at once. It cracks first. Small fissures appear in the structure that was containing the pressure, and through those fissures the first bursts of stored energy begin escaping, not in the full force of the eventual launch, but in previews. Teasers, small deposits of what the full release will deliver when the mechanism breaks completely. The previews have started, my beloved child. I have been engineering this fracture behind the scenes of your life in ways the compression prevented you from detecting. While you were focused on the ledger, counting losses and calculating deficits, I was weakening the structure that was holding the spring down, loosening the bolts, stressing the metal, applying counterpressure at precise points that would cause the containing mechanism to fail at the exact moment the spring had reached maximum compression. The timing is not accidental. Maximum compression meets structural failure at the same moment. That is engineering. And the energy that is beginning to leak through the cracks right now is producing effects in your life that your deficit-trained mind cannot source or explain. Small shifts that seem disconnected from any effort you are currently making. Improvements that arrive without corresponding action. Provisions that appear in channels you did not open. Those are leaks from a spring that is about to fully release. And the leaks are nothing compared to what the full launch will produce. Type cracking, if you have noticed, small unexplainable shifts in your life recently. Moments of provision or progress that had no visible cause, and you now believe they are the first leaks of energy from a spring that is about to fully release. The money you lost, the love you lost, the years you lost. Heaven is returning everything 7 times over. And I need you to understand why that title is not a promise but a physics report, my beloved child. 7 times is not a number I chose for spiritual aesthetics. It is the actual multiplication factor that compressed energy produces when the duration of the pressing reaches the threshold yours has reached. A spring held down for a short season returns at 2 or 3 times the force of the original compression. A spring held down for a moderate season returns at 4 or 5 times. But a spring held down for the duration yours has been held, across multiple areas simultaneously, compounding with every season, accumulating force, across financial and relational and temporal losses that were pressing the coil from 3 directions at once. That spring returns at 7. 7 is not symbolic, it is structural. And this is directly connected to why you waited. Not because I was delaying the return. Because the return at 3 times would not have compensated for the compound nature of your losses. A 3 times return on financial loss alone might have closed the gap. But you did not experience financial loss alone. You experienced simultaneous compression across every area of your life. And a simultaneous compression requires a return multiplied enough to address every category that was pressed. 3 times would have restored one area. 7 times restores them all. My child, the reason the compression felt like it was coming from every direction and at once because the loading was designed to fund a multi-category return. A spring compressed from one direction stores energy in one vector. A spring compressed from 3 directions simultaneously, money, love, and time pressing the coil from 3 angles at once, stores energy in 3 vectors. And when that spring releases, the energy does not travel in one direction. It launches in every direction simultaneously. Your return is not arriving in one area of your life. It is arriving in all of them at the same time, at 7 times the force. The containing mechanism is failing right now, my dear one, and the spring cannot be held down for 1 more day. Feel what is happening inside you at this moment. Not emotionally, physically. There is a pressure building in your chest that is not anxiety. It is stored energy pressing against a structure that is cracking in real time. The coil that has been wound tighter with every loss, every deficit, every year that was compressed into the mechanism. That coil is vibrating at a frequency that the containing structure can no longer suppress. The vibration is the countdown, and the countdown is almost at 0. I need you to understand how close you are to the launch. Not close in the way the world uses the word, the vague, optimistic, eventually kind of close that dissolves by next week. Structurally close. The bolts that were holding the mechanism together have been weakening for days. The cracks that appeared last week have been widening with every hour, and the force of the spring pressing outward against a structure that is actively failing is producing a tension that can only resolve in one direction. Up, explosive, 7-fold. My beloved child, every loss that contributed to this compression is about to be answered simultaneously. The financial coil is going to release in the form of provision so sudden and so disproportionate to your current earning capacity that your first response will not be gratitude. It will be disbelief. The relational coil is going to release in the form of a connection so precisely matched to the shape of what was lost that the gap in your heart will feel the fit. Before your mind processes the arrival, the temporal coil, the years you calculated as permanently lost, is going to release as an acceleration so dramatic that the next 3 years of your life will contain what should have taken 15. 3 areas compressed, 3 areas releasing, all at the same moment. The next thing I speak is the moment of launch, and your life will never sit at the compressed position again. Type launch if you can feel the mechanism failing inside you right now. The structure cracking, the coil vibrating, The stored energy of years of loss, pressing toward a release that nothing can contain for one more day. The spring just released, and everything that was stored inside the compression of your life is launching upward right now. My beloved child, this is the moment. The mechanism that held you down has failed completely. The bolts are broken, the structure is shattered, and the coil that was wound tighter with every loss you absorbed across money, love, and time has sprung free with a force that heaven has been calculating since the day the first compression began. The launch is not coming. The launch is happening. I need you to feel what is moving through you right now. The energy that was stored inside every financial setback, every dollar that disappeared, every investment that collapsed, every paycheck that was consumed by a deficit it could not close. That energy just converted from stored potential into active kinetic force. It is moving upward through the financial column of your life at a velocity that your ledger has no category to process. The money is not being returned. It is being launched back at 7 times the force it left. The energy that was stored inside every relational loss, every person who departed, every love that dissolved, every connection that compressed your heart into a shape smaller than it was designed to hold. That energy is releasing simultaneously, not sequentially, not one area at a time. The spring does not uncoil selectively. It releases everything it stored in a single explosive moment that sends every category of loss into a simultaneous return. Love and money and time, all launching back at once. The years you lost, the ones your mind marked as permanently unrecoverable, are releasing as compressed time. The acceleration that accompanies a spring release does not just restore position, it overshoots. And the overshoot on years that were compressed for as long as yours means the next season of your life will move at a pace that the previous season could never have produced. Your deficit just became your launch pad. Your ledger just became irrelevant. And the God who held the spring in place until the compression reached maximum is the same God who just released it with his own hand. The spring is free, and so are you. The spring has overshot your original position, and where you are landing is higher than where you were before the compression ever began, my dear child. This is the part your deficit math could never have predicted. You spent years calculating recovery, how long it would take to return to the baseline you were at before the losses started. Your mind assumed that the best possible outcome was getting back to where you were. Restoration to zero. The ledger balanced. The deficit closed. The gap between where you are and where you should have been finally equalized. But zero was never the destination. Above zero was always the destination. A released spring does not return to its resting position. Physics will not allow it. The energy stored in the compression propels the coil past the point of origin, higher than it was before the first pound of pressure was applied, and the distance it overshoots is proportional to the force that was holding it down. Your force was enormous, which means your overshoot is extraordinary. You are not returning to where you started. You are launching past it. My beloved child, this changes the mathematics of everything. The financial number on your ledger that represented the deficit, that number is not being zeroed out. It is being reversed and multiplied. Where there was negative, there will be positive of 7 times the magnitude. The relational column that tracked what was lost, that column is not being restored to its previous entry. It is being rewritten with connections that carry a depth and a reciprocity that the original relationships never possessed. And the years, the temporal column that your mind considered permanently irreversible, those are being compressed in the opposite direction. Time that moved painfully slow during the pressing is about to move supernaturally fast during the release. What should take a decade will be accomplished in a fraction of the time, because the energy stored in the temporal compression is converting into acceleration that defies human timelines. Your new position is not where you were. It is where you were always meant to be. Type overshoot if you just realize that God is not restoring you to where you were before the losses. He is launching you past that point into a position your deficit math never calculated as possible. Let me show you what your life looks like at the height of the overshoot. Because it resembles nothing your compressed position allowed you to imagine. My dear one, the first thing that changes is the ledger itself. The internal accounting system that has been running your deficit calculations for years is going to malfunction. Not because it breaks, but because the numbers it begins processing will not fit inside the categories it built during the compression. Income arriving from channels you did not construct. Provision flowing through pathways your effort did not open. Financial movement so disproportionate to your current position that the ledger will attempt to process it as an error before your spirit overrides the system and confirms that the numbers are real. Your calculator is about to encounter numbers it was never programmed to hold. The mornings change next. You have been waking up with the ledger as your first thought. The mental review of the deficit. The automatic assessment of what is owed versus what is available. The daily that the gap is still present. But a spring that has overshot its original position does not carry deficit energy. It carries surplus energy, and surplus energy produces a morning experience so foreign to your compressed normal that the first few days of it will feel almost disorienting. You will wake up without the weight, and the absence of it will take adjustment. My beloved child, the relational landscape ahead of you is being restructured by the same force that is restructuring your finances. Connections are approaching that operate at the altitude of your new position, rather than the altitude of your compressed one. People who could not reach you while you were pressed down, because their trajectory required someone at a height your compression could not access. Those people are about to intersect with a version of you that is finally at the elevation their path was designed to cross. Your spring did not just launch you financially. It launched you relationally into the proximity of connections. Your compressed position kept you beneath. People are going to witness a velocity of change in your life that will defy every assumption they built about your trajectory during the compressed years. My beloved child, the ones who watched you lose, who saw the financial setbacks accumulate, who noticed the relational departures compound, who quietly adjusted their expectations of your future downward with every season that pressed you further beneath the baseline. Those people are about to encounter a version of your story that their adjusted expectations have no framework to process. They expected a slow recovery. They are about to witness a launch. The speed of the change will be the most disorienting part, not just for you, but for everyone observing, because a compressed spring does not release in stages. It does not gradually extend over weeks and months, giving observers time to adjust their perception. It releases in a burst that converts years of stored energy into a single explosive movement. And the people watching your life are going to see in months what their prediction said would take you a decade. My child, your comeback will be so fast, it will make the setback look like it belonged to a different person. Professional doors that were sealed during the compression are going to respond to the altitude of your new position. Opportunities that require elevation to access, that exist at heights your pressed-down posture could not reach, are going to become available to a version of you that is now standing above where you were when the compression began. You will not need to climb to these doors. The spring placed you at their level. Financial channels that have never carried your name are going to begin routing provision in your direction, not because you suddenly became more qualified on paper, Because the vibrational frequency of a launched spring broadcasts at a signal strength that attracts resources the way altitude attracts wind. And the love that was lost, the relational column on your ledger, is going to be rewritten by a connection that arrives with such precision that the entry will make every previous name in that column look like a rough draft. Type velocity if you believe that the speed of your restoration is about to make people question everything they assumed about your future during the years they watched you being pressed down. I need you to understand why I chose your spring for this specific level of compression, my beloved child. Because the answer will rewrite how you see every loss you have ever experienced. Not every spring is built to withstand the pressure yours has been under. Most springs would have deformed under the simultaneous compression of financial, relational, and temporal loss, applied at the intensity and duration your life absorbed. The coils would have bent, the metal would have fatigued. The mechanism would have permanently warped into a shape that no amount of release could restore to functional spring form. Your spring did not deform, and that is not accidental, it is material. I forged your spring from a composition that I reserve for the lives I intend to compress the hardest, because the hardest compressions fund the highest launches, and only specific material can withstand the pressure required to store that much energy without structural failure. Your capacity to absorb loss after loss after loss, without permanently breaking, was not resilience you learned. It was engineering I installed. You were built for this level of compression, which means you were built for this level of launch. I chose you because your response to pressure produces energy rather than deformation. Most people under the weight you carried would have bent into a permanent shape, adapting to the compressed position, accepting it as their new architecture, losing the ability to spring back because the coils had been reshaped by the force. But you absorbed the pressure without losing your original form. The spring inside you maintained its design integrity through every loss. My dear child, that is the rarest quality a spring can possess, and I tested for it before I selected your life for this level of compression. I did not choose you despite the losses. I chose you because I knew your spring could absorb every single one of them without losing the structural capacity to convert their combined weight into a launch that will define the next chapter of your existence. Your material is the reason you suffered, and your material is the reason the suffering is about to pay a return that lesser springs could never produce. The doubt rising right now is running the same calculator that has been governing your expectations for years, and I am about to take the calculator out of its hands, my child. It sounds like this. The losses are too large. The money was too much. The years were too many. The love was too deep. Even God, working at maximum capacity, cannot return what was lost at 7 times the original, because the original was already more than I could quantify. 7 times an amount that large does not feel like a promise. It feels like mathematics that belong to a different person's story. That doubt just tried to audit God with a human calculator, and human calculators do not have a key for divine multiplication. Let me address the arithmetic directly. Your mind is calculating the return using the same system it uses to calculate the loss. Linear math. In linear math, 7 times a large number is an astronomically large number, and the mind rejects it as implausible because it cannot source the supply. Where would that much money come from? Where would that level of relational restoration originate? How can lost years be returned at any multiple when time moves in one direction? Those are legitimate questions inside a linear system, but the spring does not operate in a linear system. My beloved child, compression math is exponential. A spring does not return 7 times linearly. It returns 7 times in compressed delivery. That means the 7 times financial return does not arrive as 7 times the dollars spread across decades. It arrives as a restructuring of your financial architecture that produces 7 times the value in a fraction of the original timeline. The return is not just larger, it is faster. And the combination of larger and faster is what makes it feel impossible to a mind that is calculating in linear. Your mind says impossible, the spring says physics, and the doubt that says you are not the kind of person this happens to. That doubt has been running your expectations using data from the compression. Compressed data cannot predict launched outcomes. Your history of loss is not a forecast of your future. It is the fuel for a launch your history has no category to contain. Type new math if you are choosing right now to let God's exponential multiplication replace the linear calculator that has been telling you for years that the losses were too large to ever be returned. During every year of compression, I was not standing above the mechanisms, watching you be pressed down. I was underneath the spring, absorbing the pressure that exceeded your capacity, my beloved child. You imagined a God who watched from a distance while the losses accumulated, who observed the financial collapse without intervening, who witnessed the relational departure without intercepting, who counted the years of compression ticking past without adjusting the timeline. You pictured divine observation where there was actually divine participation. I was not watching the pressing. I was inside the pressing. There were moments during the compression when the force being applied to your spring exceeded the structural rating I built into it. Moments where the combined weight of financial loss and relational loss and temporal loss, pressing simultaneously from 3 directions, should have bent the coil past the point of functional recovery. Your spring should have deformed. The math says it should have deformed. It did not deform because I was underneath it, bearing the excess. My child, every time the pressure reached a level that would have permanently warped your spring, I placed my hand beneath the coil and absorbed the overage into my own structure. You felt those moments as the inexplicable survivals, the times you should have broken and did not, the seasons you should have collapsed and somehow stood, the losses that should have been the final compression that destroyed the mechanism and instead produced one more turn of stored energy. Those were not your strength holding. Those were my hand underneath. The nights you lay in the dark, feeling the full weight of compound loss pressing against your chest. I was not in heaven reviewing your case file. I was beneath you, bearing the portion of the weight your spring was not rated to hold alone, ensuring that the compression produced stored energy rather than structural failure. You were never compressed alone, and the spring that is now launching was held in its integrity by a hand that was invisible to you but essential to the mechanisms, surviving long enough to reach the moment of release. I know the exact weight of every loss your spring absorbed, my dear one, and the return has been calculated against every single ounce, not an estimate, not a rounded figure based on a general awareness of your suffering, the precise weight. I know the exact dollar amount of the financial loss that compressed the first coil. I know the exact relational cost, measured not in the currency the world uses, but in the currency your heart uses, which counts differently and counts higher. And I know the exact number of days that were spent inside the compression, each one recorded not as time lost, but as energy stored. Your loss ledger and my energy ledger contain the same entries. They just measure in different units. I know the specific purchase you could not make that broke something inside you. Not a luxury, a necessity, something so basic that the inability to provide it for yourself or for someone you love compressed the coil with a shame that weighed more than the dollar amount itself. That specific shame was logged, that specific weight was stored, And the return that is launching right now includes a provision so precisely calibrated to that exact shame that when it arrives, the memory of the moment will be permanently overwritten. My beloved child, I know the name that compressed the relational coil deepest, the person whose departure added more turns to the spring than any financial loss could have produced alone. I know the last conversation. I know the silence that followed. I know the specific night when the absence of that name in your life produced a compression so violent that the spring absorbed more energy in a single evening than the previous 3 months of financial pressing had generated. That name is in my records, and the relational return that is launching accounts for every ounce of pressure that name applied. The God who knows the weight to the ounce is the same God who calibrated the return to the ounce. And what was calculated against your exact losses is now arriving with the precision of a response engineered by someone who measured every gram of what was taken. Type to the ounce if you believe that God measured every specific loss, every dollar, every name, every day, and the sevenfold return has been precisely calibrated to match every single one. Now that the spring has launched, there is one thing I need you to do, my beloved child, and it will determine whether you land at the full height of the overshoot or fall back to a lower position. Burn the ledger, the internal accounting system that has been tracking your losses, the one that runs the deficit calculations without your permission, the one that updates itself every night with the same devastating total, the one that has been governing your expectations and your self-worth and your belief about what God has assigned to your life based on the mathematics of what was taken. That ledger must be destroyed, not filed away, not closed temporarily, destroyed. The ledger was useful during the compression. It kept you honest about your position. It prevented the dangerous delusion of pretending the losses did not exist. During the pressing, the ledger served as an accurate record of what was being stored as energy, even though you experienced it as subtraction. But the spring has launched now, and a person who is rising cannot afford to carry a document that was calibrated to the compressed position. My child, the ledger will try to pull you back down. Every time the return begins manifesting, every time provision arrives that exceeds your deficit expectations, every time a relational connection appears that your loss-trained mind did not believe was possible, every time acceleration occurs that your temporal calculation said could not happen, the ledger will attempt to override the evidence with its own outdated total. It will whisper, "You do not deserve this." It will calculate that the return is too large for a person with your history. It will drag your expectations back down to the compressed position, even while the spring is actively launching you higher. Do not let the old math govern the new position. When the provision arrives, receive it without referencing the deficit. When the love appears, welcome it without consulting the loss column. When the years begin accelerating, stop counting what was taken and start counting what is arriving. The ledger belongs to the compression, and the compression is over. You made it through the compression, my beloved child, and I need you to feel what it is like to be rising instead of being pressed down. Feel the upward motion, not with your circumstances yet. Those will catch up to what is happening in the spiritual realm within days. Feel it internally. The sensation of stored energy converting into movement after years of stillness. The unfamiliar lightness of a spring that is no longer being held down by forces it could not see or resist or overcome through its own effort. You are moving upward for the first time in years, and the motion itself is the proof. I want to thank you for something that the compression made almost impossible to recognize as valuable. Thank you for not breaking. Thank you for absorbing loss after loss after loss without allowing the coil to deform permanently. Thank you for waking up inside the compressed position every morning and choosing to exist inside a mechanism that was pressing you down with a weight your human frame should not have been able to sustain. You sustained it, and the sustaining funded the launch. My dear child, the ledger you have been keeping, the one I just asked you to burn, I want you to know that I kept my own version, not a deficit ledger, an energy ledger. And on my ledger, every entry that appears as loss on yours appears as stored force on mine. The money lost, stored. The love lost, stored. The years lost, stored. Every line item that produced grief in your accounting produced energy in mine. And the total on my ledger, the sum of every compressed force from every loss across every area of your life, is the exact amount of energy that just launched your spring. Let the tears come if they are forming. Not tears of loss this time. Tears of a person who just felt the mathematics of heaven replace the mathematics of grief, and understood for the first time that nothing was ever subtracted. Everything was being stored for this exact moment of explosive, sevenfold, disproportionate, irreversible return. You are rising, and the God who held the spring is rising with you. Type rising if tears are forming right now. Not from loss, but from the overwhelming realization that every single thing you lost was being stored as energy. And the launch that is carrying you upward right now is funded by every ounce of what you thought was permanently gone. You are not the person who carries a deficit anymore, my beloved child. That identity, the one who ran the numbers every night and arrived at the same devastating total, the one who measured the gap between where they are and where they should have been, and called it permanent, the one who accepted compound loss as the final mathematics of a story that would never balance. That identity was compressed into the mechanism that just broke apart when the spring released. The deficit identity launched with the spring, but it did not survive the altitude. The person rising right now is someone the compressed version could never have imagined. Not the person who recovers. Not the person who slowly climbs back to the baseline over years of gradual improvement. The person who overshoots. The person whose launch was funded by losses so numerous and so sustained that the stored energy propelled them past the original position into a height that the parallel timeline, the one you grieved, the one you compared yourself to, the one you believed represented the life you should have had, could never have reached. The parallel version was never the ceiling. The launched version exceeds it. From this moment forward, you carry a different identity, my dear child. Not the identity of someone who lost. The identity of someone whose losses were converted into the most explosive launch heaven has ever funded in a single life. Every dollar lost became a pound of upward force. Every love lost became a revolution in the coil that added velocity to the release. Every year lost became stored acceleration that is now compressing a decade of restoration into a timeline. So short your mind will not believe the calendar. You did not lose money. You loaded financial energy. You did not lose love. You loaded relational force. You did not lose years. You loaded temporal acceleration, and the spring that carried all of it just released, with the full fury of a God who does not restore to the original, but returns 7 times what was taken from a child he refused to let the compression destroy. The ledger is burned, the spring is free, the launch has begun, and the person rising through the air right now is not carrying a single ounce of deficit, because everything that was pressing them down is now the very thing propelling them up. You are not behind anymore. You are above. And the view from the height of a 7-fold return will make you weep with gratitude for the very losses that funded the launch. Subscribe to this channel so that every time heaven releases a spring in your life, the message reaches you before the mechanism breaks and the launch begins. You are not a person who loses anymore. You are a person whose losses are converted into launches that exceed the original position by a factor of 7. The next message carries the coordinates of your landing point, and the altitude will take your breath away. Type sevenfold if you are leaving this message permanently changed. Knowing the deficit was never permanent, the losses were never subtracted, the spring was loaded by every single thing that pressed you down, and the God who held the mechanism just released it, with a return so explosive that the life ahead of you will make the losses behind you feel like the investment they always were.